I want to start off because everybody's going to be performing scenes from Poker Face, and it's such an incredible, fantastic show. Every episode just feels like a movie of its own. It's just really exceptional quality television. And can you tell us a little bit about how you became involved?
Well, initially I became involved because they reached out and asked if I would come in and meet with everybody. It was a pretty exhaustive process, actually. I don't think I've ever had as many meetings before I actually got a job as I did on that. Because I had to meet with Ryan Johnson. I had to meet the people at T Street. I had to meet the people at Peacock. And my last meeting was with Natasha. I also met Tony Toast, who was being brought in as the showrunner for this second season because Ryan couldn't be as hands-on as he was the first. And just talked about my way of working and sussed out what it was they were looking for someone in that role for the season,
Yeah, and so can you explain a little bit more, because you obviously directed 2 episodes, which we'll get into this season, but you were EP across the whole season.
Yeah, I mean, the EP title was one of what's probably like 27 EPs on that show at this point. Really, what I was the producing director. The EP title was something that was bestowed on me, but it didn't translate to anything other than my fulfilling the roles of a producing director. And that is a job that can change from production to production depending on what the showrunner is wanting it to be. It's very much defined by the showrunner. And in this case, it was directing a couple of episodes myself, but also being there as a sort of directorial liaison between the show and the guest directors coming in, and also being on hand to do second unit work and reshoots if the director of record was not available. That sometimes the need to do reshoots isn't discovered until sometime later, and the directors tend to move on to other projects often. So it was there, it's a role to be there in-house and as a consistent presence for the crew as well. On other shows, the cast, but in this, it was only Natasha who was returning, episode to episode. So that's what the job pretty much consisted of.
I love that they took the care to create that position, actually.
Yeah, me too. Worked out well for me.
And I want to ask, because I think you have an expert opinion here. We hear a lot of people talk about what it's like to be a guest star in a show and to walk in with an established cast and just do a great job in one episode. And what is it like for a director? How does a director set themselves up for success when they are coming in to just do 1 or 2 episodes of a show?
It's a challenging experience. I found, especially for me, because the early directing that I did was on shows that I was already established on as an actor. So I kind of parlayed my position as a cast member into expressing an interest in directing. Finally got a chance to do that, the first time being on Northern Exposure. And so I didn't have quite the intimidating interface because I was familiar with the production and the show knew me, I knew them. When I started making the transition into directing shows purely coming in only as a director, it definitely was an adjustment because I had to suss out an entirely new group of people, a new production, and get to learn them, and they needed to learn me. And so the skills necessary really revolve around being present, keeping your eyes open, and doing your homework, watching the show, but then talking to people and asking how they work and what the approach is, and making it clear always when I was coming into established shows that I didn't intend to reinvent the wheel or fix what wasn't broken, Yeah.
So you talk about meeting Natasha at the beginning of the process. Can you share with us, what made your working relationship on this show with Natasha strong and productive?
I think Natasha is somebody that has a very strong idea of what she wants to be doing. She knows that character inside and out. And I didn't really have to do a lot of hand holding with Natasha. So I found a lot of the time my work with her, the most important thing I felt like I could offer her was making sure that the cast members that were coming in knew how she worked and were comfortable, interfacing with a process that was already very much up and running when it came to her. And for the most part, I didn't have to do a lot of hand holding with her, and I wasn't going to. She was a prime example of how I wasn't going to try to fix something that wasn't broken. She's got a way of working and a brand and knows that character inside and out. So I really wanted to just create an environment where she felt completely free and empowered to do what it is she does.
So to that point, I think you must have had what I imagine was a difficult job. With the first episode that we see you direct, Sloppy Joseph, the kids are kind of the star of the shows, and they're both incredible. I think it's Eva Jade Halford and Callum Vinson both
Yes.
do such an incredible job. And I think particularly that's those scenes where Natasha is sort of communicating with the young girl,
Going
really
toe-to-toe with
confronting
her,
her,
yeah.
exactly that. So how do you prepare, or how did you prepare those young actors in particular for that work?
First of all, by being incredibly lucky. I mean, in both cases, both of those kids are absolutely remarkable craftspeople. They had a very strong idea of who these characters were. They had ideas of how they wanted to play. They were incredibly professional and focused. When we did scenes with large groups of kids who were, there as background performers or minor characters, they really had to take pains to kind of distance themselves from the childlike play that would inevitably happen because they wanted to stay focused on what they were doing. In Ava's case, she really almost started looking at some of them with this sort of disdain, like I'm not going to lower myself to those childlike games they're playing. I have work to do, but it served the character beautifully, and they were kind of mind blowing in how professional they were and skilled they were. There was one scene between Natasha and Ava where she was on that carousel. And so not only did she have to be doing her performance and remembering her lines, but she had to keep a keen awareness of continuity of where she was in the circle so that when we got into coverage on it, it matched. And she was absolutely seamless with it, like just spot on. And I just loved working with both of them. I felt incredibly lucky. And then went on to work with Callum immediately after that on an episode of The Night Agent, where he, unbeknownst to me, had been cast in a role that I got to be reunited with him on. So
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I wonder with young actors, because they do just all seem so well trained and professional these days. But I'm just wondering, if there's any particular advice you have for them, and maybe it's not just young actors, but fresh actors, about staying emotionally grounded when the pressure is high, when they're in a high pressure situation like that.
I wish I had, one size fits all kind of advice for how to do that. I have worked with kids that I have found myself concerned about because of the pressure that they put themselves under about it, or the unfortunate occasional experience where you feel like they're kind of doing it with prompting from people that are trying to make it something that they're excited about when they're actually not, and that's really unfortunate. In their cases, I didn't feel either of them needed that. They seemed to have a pretty balanced idea of life, and had found a craft and a hobby that they really loved pursuing, and it wasn't at the expense of other aspects of their life. I didn't sense, but I guess part of the advice I give to anybody who wants to make a career of this is make sure that you have creative outlets that enrich you and don't require permission from anybody. So find other ways to be creative, so that when you're not getting those inevitable periods where you're not getting hired as much as you might like to be, you're still not stifled as a creative person. And that can be any number of things. It can be, in the arts, but it can also be something as, refining your skills as a chef, or journaling, or something that allows you to feel connected to your creative self, so that it's not constantly on a permission basis.
It struck me as, yes, great life advice. It struck me as sort of advanced to be aware of for Eva to be aware of these technical elements like continuity. And I wonder, and you were acting from a very young age too, just, how young actors or people who are starting out can really learn those terms on set and be aware of things, technical things, that they might not be aware of. Like, where does that vocabulary come from? How do you learn that vocabulary on the job?
I think by being present and keeping your eyes and ears open, and asking questions. There's a realm of behavior I see in a lot of actors that involves sometimes when people have come from the stage world, especially, which I think is always a great place to have come from, but the transition into film and television work is tricky for them sometimes, because the imposition of people and equipment and lights all around you can have a tendency to make actors cocoon off from all of that. And there's a part of the process where that's obviously necessary, but there's also, for anybody that comes from the stage, there's that point on stage where you've been doing the play for a while, you start to relax and your peripheral vision starts to open up. So where initially I'm on stage in the first few performances, the only thing I'm looking at is you, and I look at my business and I look at you, and then after a few weeks, things start to widen out, and you become aware of what's going on in the wings as I'm talking to you, and then you become aware of the first few rows of the house, and eventually you're actually comfortable enough and relaxed enough to be fully present in the full gestalt of what's happening. And I think getting to that point on a set is a great place to be, because you can become aware of what other people are doing and what their jobs are. And a piece of advice I'll often give actors that are sort of early on in the process is, if you're allowed to, there's almost always a second team rehearsal that will go on before you actually shoot. So the actors will rehearse, they'll put marks down, they'll light sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for a half an hour. And then before the actors are called back in to roll, they'll do a second team rehearsal where the camera will go through all of the moves that are going to be taking place in that given setup. If as an actor you can get permission from the showrunners to watch a second team rehearsal, it's a hugely important education, I think, because you'll see what the shot is, and you'll see that things you were desperately worried about don't matter at all, because the camera's just not going to see it. And you'll also become aware of things that you should be very aware of, because the camera's going to be making a move, and suddenly a moment that you didn't think was necessarily vital in that given performance becomes the focus of the shot. And if you're aware of that, it will just help you refine your performance, I think, as an on-camera actor. The camera, I like working with cameramen who and women who are essentially almost like cast members, you know, rather than something to be kept out there. You're going to throw off my performance. It's like, how are you shooting me and where do I need to be and how can we be working in concert to really give focus to what it is I'm doing, and I can make your job easier too.
Great advice. I
Yeah.
love that. And along those lines with rehearsals, you know, specifically on Poker Face, once, you know, the first team does come in for rehearsal, you know, how long is rehearsal and what do you expect from those actors in those early takes?
In the early takes or in the early rehearsals?
What's that process like of rehearsal and shooting?
Well, I think it's different for different actors and different directors. I tend to I can tend to drive producers crazy sometimes because I don't come in with a huge laundry list of things that I've already worked out to the letter in terms of what every shot is going to be. There's some directors that love working that way and do a huge amount of shot listing and storyboarding, and then the rehearsal process becomes a matter of kind of nudging everybody into the work that's been already done at home. And I don't judge that way of working. It's just, as an actor, it wasn't something I always really liked. I liked feeling as an actor that my instincts were something that would at least be partially incorporated into the process. And as a director, I find that I like being surprised by what we collectively are doing as an ensemble. And so my rehearsals tend to be, I think, a little more exploratory, and I start out generally by just reading the words and not worrying about blocking at all. My father, when he was directing on stage, would have actors he would almost command them, don't do any blocking at all. Let's just keep reading the scene. We'll keep reading the scene. And eventually the actors themselves would become not frustrated, but ready to have an impulse and move. And their first move would be the thing around which the blocking of an entire scene would be built. There's not the time to do that in film, and certainly not in television because it's so truncated. But the spirit of that is something that I like to try and evoke, and let the actors feel that their instincts are part of what is building the scene, and then take it from there. Inevitably, I find that a way of shooting the scene in an interesting way and efficiently will present itself if you're true to that. There are exceptions to that. There are, sometimes there are action sequences or stunt sequences that simply need to be mapped out in a different kind of way. And those are, those make themselves clear. But when a scene is character driven and dialogue driven, I really like to have it be a sense of discovery.
And I think this is why actors make great directors. I'd like to hear from you. Do you require, or how should actors adjust their performances based on where the camera is, or in terms of sort of framing, like a wide shot and a close-up? Do you suggest adjustments based on framing to the performance?
I don't tend to be. I don't think I tend to be that technical about it. But I think it's just reminding actors occasionally if something seems. It's a question of scale, basically, more often than not. It's not altering the essential performance. It's altering the. It's akin to the equalizer on a stereo. Like if a scene that may require a certain kind of size and projection in a really wide shot can become a little fraught sometimes if you've got a camera right up in somebody's face. And more experienced actors, I think, have an innate sense of that. But there's some very talented actors that don't want to think about the technical part of it at all. And I think a director's job in that case is to sort of just modulate things so that the tonal levels feel appropriate to the size and framing of the shot, you know.
So talking about your two episodes, they are so different. You know, the following episode, One Last Job,
Yes.
you know, it's like a meta ode to classic heist movies in this show, which
And
is
rom-coms.
itself, and rom-coms. Yes, I mean, there's just so much going on, so many levels, so many layers. It's comedy, it's drama, it's mystery, it's just so many different things all at once. But also it feels like the pace of that episode, because there is action and, you know, it's almost like a completely different show.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if and also the performances are just divine. This relationship between Corey Hawkins and Natasha,
Yes.
I mean, in an hour, the heartbreak, it's just, and even this, I mean, it's just so much and it's so succinct. How do you begin to try and achieve these things?
Well, the pacing was something, certainly in the action sequences and the montages around the preparation for the heist. We had great source material because not only is the show in general paying homage to other films, but here we had an actual film buff as one of the central characters, Sam Richardson, in it, and so, you know, using films like Heat and Ocean's 11 as our guide, there was a kind of, it was written with those films in mind, and there was a kind of stylistic pacing that sort of was our blueprint. And even then, what I turned in the initial cut got there were jump cuts that were added in post-production that tightened it up even more. Initially, when I saw what the editor had done with the second go-round of notes supplied, I was like, oh, it's almost too fast now. But as I got acclimated to it, I felt like, no, this is actually really appropriate. The chemistry between Corey and Natasha was their chemistry. And so a lot of what I did there was kind of stay out of the way. I felt like we had lightning in a bottle there, and they really clicked with one another. She obviously adored him, and he found her rhythms and was able to work around that in a wonderful way. And I just sort of like delighted in trying to figure out interesting ways of shooting that, and occasionally would make a suggestion, but by and large it was really a lot of the gifts of that were just being handed to me.
Yeah, it is fabulous, and I loved all of the posters, and there was so much fun stuff going on throughout the episode all the time.
Yeah. The moment where Sam's character ends up impaling Juice and turns around and realizes he's done that with the Kill Bill sword, and the Kill Bill poster is right behind him. It was just sort of like it ended up being kind of a perfect little moment.
Perfect. And I also just hearing the Heat soundtrack at the end, which I don't think I've heard for 20 years, I was like, wow. It really is fantastic.
Well, Heat is a movie that I as a director, I return to constantly, if only for specific sequences, because I still think what Michael Mann did with some of those sequences is state of the art. It's pretty brilliant work.
So I love that you talked a little bit about your father directing plays, and I'm wondering if there are any other directors that you had worked with where you feel like you had learned from them and you had brought maybe some techniques or things that you appreciated as an actor that they had brought to the project. Is there anything that you have, stolen from other people, gathered from other people that you feel like you bring?
I don't know that I've stolen from them. Because I never want to out and out just sort of plagiarize somebody's work or ideas. But I've definitely been inspired by a number of directors, both directors that I've worked with and then directors who I've watched over the years. I think the pinnacle of that for me was getting to work with the Coen brothers, because I think they're absolute geniuses and had been a student and a fan of their work for decades, and then got a chance to work with them on A Serious Man. And I was nervous about it because, I would have been nervous anyway, but there's always that part of you when you're meeting your heroes. It's like, oh, please, please live up to what I think you're going to be. And they exceeded every fantasy I had about what they were and the way that they worked, the level of inclusion, and their insistence on creating a company before any film rolled on it. We were all brought in early on for rehearsals for like a week and a half. When we got our costume fittings, we were brought to Minneapolis. We met one another. We were taken out to a big dinner, a cast dinner, where they hung out and we drank wine and talked. And so then got sent home knowing that in a month I was going to be called back. But by the time I was called back, I felt like I'm rejoining this company of people that I know and have a relationship with already. And they were just great. And that way of working, I think, more than any specific shot or way of designing a scene, but the spirit with which they approach things, I found incredibly inspiring. Yeah.
Yes. Inspired, much better word than stolen, yes.
Oh. Well, I decided right then I was going to steal everything from them.
So just as we're about to get into the scene work, I'm just wondering, knowing everything you know now, if you look back, are there things that I feel like this is such a trope, but are there things that you wish you knew then? Or what would you look back and tell yourself when you were starting out about the process of film or television acting?
That's a really good question. Constant things I wish I knew then. I wish that I had spent more time really learning the ins and outs of other professions on a film set. I've relied really heavily on the expertise of the crews that I've worked with, but there are times when I think I could have relied on that in a more informed way had I really taken the time to ask more questions and not be so sort of focused on what was sometimes the narrow field of my interest as an actor or a director. I watched an interview with David Fincher recently, and he was talking about it in a slightly more mercenary way, because he said that he never wanted to be talked out of pursuing a kind of perfected vision he had in his head, because he was relying on a technician or a technical piece of advice that may have been compromised by somebody not wanting to do the extra work. That's not why it struck me personally, but because I didn't want to be like being able to prove other people in other job descriptions wrong necessarily, or not be taken advantage of. But I think, there are so many aspects of filmmaking and so many technical layers to it that the more informed you are, the better you are at your craft. Yeah.
Great advice. All right, we're going to take a minute to change the setup, and then we're going to bring the actors up to do some scene work from Poker Face. Adam Arkin, thank you so much for being here with us this evening.
Privileged.